Well, hello and welcome to Off the Wall with Bridgeman Images, a series that invites you into the minds and studios of artists and creatives who are pushing the boundaries of where art can be found. I'm Alea Duvetti, and today we're thrilled to dive into the epic Ken Burns documentary series, The American Revolution, which is currently airing on PBS. Bridgeman Images had the privilege of collaborating with the Florentine Films team for over 5 years to source authentic visuals for the documentary. We're honored to be joined today by two vital people which brought the series to life. Producer Salimah El-Amin and co-director David Schmidt. We'll be discussing how they navigated the challenges of visualizing a world before photography, the aesthetics of working with fine art, and the documentary's contemporary impact. At the end, we will try our best to answer a few Q&As from the audience. So via the Q&A section on the bottom of your screens, please send in your question, your name and city, which will all remain private. But let's get started. Welcome, Salimah and David.
Thank
Good
you
to be
so
here.
much. Thank you for having us.
So I wanted to start by zooming out a little bit. The American Revolution docu-series arrives at a moment where identity, history, and truth really feel more urgent than ever. So what do you hope audiences will see differently about this moment in history through your lens?
Oh, wow.
Big question.
Zooming out.
Yeah, I hope that audiences see themselves in this history. I think one of the millions of things that surprised me in working on this film is just how wide-ranging the American Revolution was, how many people contributed to it, how many people fought against it, how many lives it impacted both within the original boundaries of the United States and beyond, all throughout North America, really all around the world. It began, sure, on Lexington Green, just outside of Boston, but it ballooned to become this global war. And not only in its time did it matter, the ideals put forward that helped build that coalition, that helped win that war, um, that are codified in the sorry that are listed in the Declaration of Independence and then enshrined in law in the Bill of Rights. Those are things that are going to inspire Americans to push for greater participation in their democracy, but also inspire independence movements around the world. So the American Revolution matters to history. It matters to us today. I think it matters to everybody. And I don't know that without really taking the moment to think about it, people quite recognize that. It's something that we always know something about. Americans know something about it all the time because it's the 4th of July. It's our major holiday. It's our flag. George Washington's on our currency. But I think we have a relationship to it that is a little bit more superficial than it deserves.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned too that everyone knows about it, but it's a period in history set 250 years ago,
Hmm.
long before the advent of photography or footage. So,
Yeah.
Salimah, I'm wondering, how did you and your team manage to work around the inherent limitations of visual archives, especially dealing with a period in history that's so notable, but again, quite far in the past?
Yeah, I mean, so it was quite a challenge in previous projects with Ken. Photography is front and center. We really value that medium. So to not have it, it was, we had to think creatively. We also knew that the material culture of that time, the amount of paintings that were done during that time or, visual arts wasn't as abundant. So what we did was we just casted a wide net. We first started to bring in material from the time, make sure we got all of that material as much as we could with Bridgeman's help. And then we scoped out a little bit wider, moving further into the 19th century visual imagery of the American Revolution, the 20th, and then the 21st century. And so we were hoping that we can create a tapestry and a visual language with all these disparate styles, mediums, and we relied a little bit on the editors to kind of help us, tell that story visually through the materials that we gather. Now, of course, along with David, who is one of the co-directors. But we really just started to cast a very wide net. We didn't, we, if it was beautiful, it was important and to the time. We had different criteria, but we wanted to make sure that our editors and our directors had as many options to tell this history as much as possible. And then we ended up actually commissioning some artwork from artists that we had found, because in some cases, some of the battles, some of the people that populated this world were not represented, even up until the late 19th century. And so we hired illustrators to help us, fill out the gaps and make sure everyone is represented.
So a lot of material, because I know even just from our standpoint that you downloaded over 3,000 images and ended up using something around 200. So,
Yes.
I mean, you mentioned artworks that were created in the 18th, 19th, 20th century.
Right.
How did you ensure that these different artworks or documents were able to coalesce into a unified visual language and they weren't all kind of disparate?
Right. And that is the huge challenge. And that's why it takes us many years to edit the film. So, you know, in we tended to lean on oil paintings a lot because it does have a more realistic, visual look that maybe mimics closest to photography, so that we can do those beautiful zoom ins into the eye and try to, get some sort of emotion. But one of the ways in which the editors and the directors have figured it out was that if we grouped different styles of art, the same styles of art in one scene or another scene, so that there's some unity within that scene, that really helped with creating a more like a smoother experience of the visual imagery. So that was one tactic. The other was just really just making sure that every piece of art that we include was just really amazing. Also, in terms of resolution, we made sure that the imagery were as high as resolution as we can get, so that we can do those zoom ins. But it really was also the strength of the storytelling itself and zooming in on those particular details of a painting. So we may, see a wide painting of Bunker Hill, but if we're talking about, say, African American soldiers, we will, take a piece of that painting and zoom in on that. And so as folks are hearing what we're trying to explain to them, they're seeing it. That's also a unifying way of marrying all the visuals together.
Even in the subjects where it's 20th century, our editors are used to kind of piecing together. It's almost mixed media. It's different media that is on avail in this project, obviously. But whether it's something that we filmed ourselves for the Roosevelts, say, or a photograph of Franklin Roosevelt, or newsreel, and of varying qualities, sometimes color, sometimes not. So really, even in that space, it's kind of trial and error. And we have the time, we have the expert editors to really pull this off. But it's not always with great intention what we're out there grabbing. It's get everything that you can. Let's put it together and see what's going to work. And the place we start is if there's a portrait from the period of a character, Well, let's use it. If we have a manuscript with somebody's handwriting, let's use it. A map. We try as much as we can to use stuff from the period because that's definitely part of the story. But so is how these events have been remembered throughout our history. So to use, and I'm sure we'll talk more about some of the artists we use, but to use something like Alonzo Chappell's painting of Bunker Hill, yeah, he painted it well after the fact, but he studied it. He knew what uniforms people were wearing. This is what his interpretation was, and we felt very comfortable including that as part of our storytelling process.
Interesting. I mean, you both mentioned photography, and I know with different projects that you've very famously worked on in the past, whether it be the Civil War, Vietnam, baseball, American parks, um, there's so much that is tied to that aesthetic of black and white photography
Hmm.
and old footage showreel. But because you were working primarily with paintings and paintings of this particular style that you had mentioned, how much did the paintings that you use influence the aesthetic direction of the entire series?
Mm.
That's a really good question. Ken always likes to say that he wants to treat still images, photographs, primarily in his previous work, but now definitely a lot of oil paintings. He wants to treat them as live footage, meaning he wants to see movement in them. That's why there's the famous pan and zoom Ken Burns effect. And he wants to treat live cinematography as a painting. So I don't know how much intention there is in this, but there are so many beautiful scenic shots in this series that Buddy Squires and others filmed that almost look like oil paintings, almost look like the Hudson River School. Meanwhile, Salima was referring to this a little bit. We can take apart an image like the death of General Warren at Bunker Hill and kind of see like when Copley's creating that, he's got one moment, basically. Let's put everything in that one moment. And this is one moment of trying to tell a story of an entire battle.
Right.
And so all of this stuff is not, all of this stuff is happening at once, but we can take it apart and do it over time. Whereas you just show up and you just imagine it's all happening at once. Some people criticize that. They say, oh, you can't take this stuff to be at face value because this all didn't happen in the same space or at once. But I feel like we should be um, charitable and generous towards the artist because look how much they're able to accomplish with a single frame if you think the way that we think. So anyway, we can get the movement if we move in on different parts. We can have the passage of time that maybe somebody walking into a museum can have. But that is a little bit more difficult if you're just looking at it on paper, say.
Yeah, and I guess
Exactly.
the Ken Burns effect that you mentioned that everyone very infamously knows. Um, I imagine you touched on resolution. That's extremely paramount. And I know we had the pleasure of working with your team and also with some of our partner museums, wherein some images that are available are just not high enough resolution for you to really focus on those details that you mentioned. So Salima, I know that your team was really
Yeah.
involved with the museums directly and institutions to actually take the paintings off the wall and get
Yes.
really high level resolution shots done.
Yeah, absolutely. The Thomas Lawrence 1792 George III, I think, is definitely one of them that we requested Bridgeman to request the archive to rephotograph. So again, in photography, it's very easy to pull out a negative or the original print, plop it onto a scanner bed, and just scan it. Doesn't take much, but in order to get the resolution that we need for ultra high definition broadcast, or we're talking about 10,000 pixels if we can get it, across, which requires, if it's hanging, it needs to be pulled off the wall Sometimes they do agree to pull it off the wall. Sometimes, the photographer has to be creative and photograph it. And some of these paintings are huge. I'm not sure how big this one is, but I went to Edinburgh and saw Lord Dunmore's painting, and it's the side of a building. It's huge.
Wow.
So it requires quite a bit of work to get them photographed again, and then we're then able to make sure they look beautiful as we zoom into George III's face or eyeball even, as we do in photography. So that was, and then we have to build out that kind of time because first, uh, sometimes these arts they're not readily available. They may be in storage. Then they need to arrange for the photographer to come and maybe close part of the wing of the gallery which is being hung, and have the right people who are minding it, making sure these precious items aren't damaged in the photography. So this could take weeks, and we, like you said, we had over 200 images both in the book and the series, and many of them we requested new photography, and for the most part, the partners that you worked with were obliged to help us. In some cases that we did have no's, and we totally understand that. And we did our best with what we were working with. Or sometimes we did decide to replace an image if it's just way too low of a resolution. But that was something that was new for me, working in documentaries for 20 some years. I've never had to build out a time so that we can send a photographer into wherever archive and arrange for that. So that was a treat. And I hope the archives will be able to use the new resolution file for their archives. So we definitely give those away, repay for it, but we're happy to give it. And I think also just seeing this art in such high resolution kind of, allows the audience to claim them in a way, to know that these pieces of art are in their archives, are readily available, and that they're part of their history, and to not forget them. And hopefully the history feels, more familiar and closer to them. So, that was just a real joy to work with Tim and his team to, hunt these down and get them photographed.
And
Well, I know
we work directly with museums to sometimes do it. And I just want to say, like, it's a lot easier working through Bridgeman. So thank you for helping us out with all of that. I also want to say, I talk a lot about how the reenactments that we've put into the film allow you to see the human effort that the war effort required. So you see boots in the mud, you see hands at the making the uniforms, etc., making the bullets. Um, but with the high resolution scans, you can actually see the brushwork, and you can feel the human effort that went into making that painting in a way that I know I have, we saw this in low resolution for so many years, and then we saw it, mastered, and it was just a revelation at that
Yeah.
moment. And I know that a lot of viewers have commented to me on how wonderful it is to see the brushwork
Yeah.
even.
Yeah,
So
and I
one
guess
archive in particular that we worked with, not with Bridgeman, but that was the revelation that we went in. I went on some of those shoots, and you see the pieces. They just sometimes the scans don't do them justice, and you see not just the brushwork, but flecks of color that you didn't notice. And so being right in there with the art, or getting that high resolution, we're able to do so much more with it. And with the brush stroke too, we're trying to evoke emotion or energy about a particular scene or battle, and even that really adds to that type of energy and emotion to the scene. Sorry, I stepped
No,
on.
not at all. It's such a pleasure to hear. Well, and again, I have to say thank you for the very kind shout out and the incredible work that my
Wouldn't have
lovely
said it if it weren't
colleagues
true.
Tim and Wendy have done working with you both. But I mean, speaking about the human form and the um, visualization of that handiwork, it's something that museums certainly have their place and are very important institutions, but for you to be able to recontextualize these images, do you feel like you're really giving them a new life?
Oh yeah. Well, absolutely. I think like you say, having them hanging in a museum, and of course with the explanation, that's one way of experiencing it. But one of the reasons why, I think documentaries are so important is that you are invoking a kind of empathy for the individuals who story that you're telling, the history that you're telling. And so, these pieces of art are part of that, journey for an audience to be empathetic about what, and empathetic as well as just again be closer to what has occurred in the past. I think it bridges the gap, the wide gap of time for the audience. And so, recontextualizing these images, this material culture too, in that way, I think bridges the gap of familiarity or just also curiosity as well. But yeah,
There's, the we all have our issues with the internet. But there is something truly amazing about all of the work that your partners have done to digitize their collections and to make them available online. Stuff that's maybe not even hanging in the wall, but even if it is, you have to go there to see it. We work really hard on this. We have really high resolution scans. It looks gorgeous on TV. It's still on TV. Um, so there's nothing that can completely take the place of actually seeing the artworks themselves in person. And this is not stuff that's in your website, probably, but there are some portraits that have nobody's seen except for in like some nobleman's house in England in the last 250 years that are in this series. And, you know, we're thinking about how it's going to help us tell a story. But yeah, we are giving that painting new life. And I think when you undertake something this big, there's all sorts of things that aren't necessarily your intention that come off of it. So maybe there's collateral, not damage, whatever the opposite is of getting Benedict Arnold's story out there, for instance. Those paintings were not easy to find. So great job, Salima and her team.
yeah. Well, and I would just say too, just my own experience, seeing, for example, none of this also wasn't through Bridgeman, but it's in the Met, The Crossing of the Delaware by Emanuel Lutz. After working on this project, going to see that piece is just kind of awe-inspiring because you read about it as a kid, you learn about it in your textbooks, you see it in text, and and then you watch the documentary. You think about what it must have been like for George Washington and the Continental Army and the soldiers who were making their way across the Delaware River to Trenton. And then you see the piece, and you're like, wow, this is a really such an important piece. I feel like I'm in it. I remember what I saw in that documentary. I learned, I know the history. So I think, in that way, it feels like they have a little bit of a renewed
And
lease on life. I don't know.
And there's so like Leutz's painting and some of these other ones we've been talking about are enormous, and that is really impressive. But so are the miniatures. So like, if you see something in our film, they all seem the same size. Um, but some of the there's some amazing paintings by some French miniaturists about the Battle of Yorktown that I just cannot get over, and I'd really like to see in person. There's one painting that we licensed for the Benjamin Franklin film, I think through you guys, which is Benjamin West's painting of Franklin with the key and the cherubs behind him that's on display at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And that's a familiar image to me. I imagined it to be very big. It's like the size of a postcard. It's wild what he was capable of doing there. You could easily walk by it in the museum and not see it. So it's all sorts of, I think we're allowing a different view of all this art. But there's another story there too. So go see this stuff if you can.
Well, it's really invigorating to hear really the passion that you both have come through about the artworks. And I know when we had spoken previously, you both mentioned that you're not art historians, but to be able to engage with this work, wherein maybe you don't have the access to walk into the museum at the Royal Collections if you're based in Portland or New York or Los Angeles. So I think that's really incredible. And further to that, I know the work that yourselves at Florentine Films work alongside PBS on a lot of education programs. And I just want to applaud the work you're doing for the arts and
Thanks.
inspiring that same level of passion and interest in the youth is really important. Um, Shifting a little bit from there, I know you mentioned Benedict Arnold, George Washington, but you're working with a period where visual representation of marginalized groups, such
Hmm.
as enslaved people, indigenous women, is often scarce or biased. What is the responsibility in visually acknowledging their presence and agency? And how do you fill these gaps ethically without resorting to speculation?
Mm.
All good questions.
A bit of a
So,
bomb drop, but
so, 18th century North America, I don't know the percent, but it's very small that have their likeness survive. They had to have had the money and the time to sit for a portrait, and very few people did. Plus, they had to know John Singleton Copley, it feels like, or Charles Wilson Peale. There's not that many portrait painters out there. Plus, they don't have time for it because they're fighting a war. So, it's not a wide swath of people that have their portraits painted. There's quite a lot in Boston of names we know because Copley was there and because he's such an incredible artist. And a lot of them are in the film. Um, Joseph Brant, who is a major character, um, is a Mohawk man who traveled to England during the war and in England had his portrait painted and had his portrait painted afterwards several times. I'm sure he's a hero in your country of Canada. Um, And there are other native figures who have their portraits painted, but they are almost exclusively men, and they are prominent men as well. This is a story that involves millions of people, some of whose stories we have without their picture. If that's the case, we want to see their name in any way we can, whether it's on a muster roll or a list of people who tried to escape slavery and were recaptured. All their names were printed in the Virginia Gazette. I find that to be an incredibly moving document. Maybe we see it in their handwriting, their signature, um, or we look for ways that they have been represented since, whether that's in some of those artists we were talking about of the 19th century or the 20th century, or these watercolor artists who we ran across because they had done some work for the Museum of the American Revolution and other institutions. Their firm is called Wood Ronceville Harlan, and Greg Harlan in particular, it really knows this stuff and knows how to. It's not speculation. He's done the research. So we licensed a lot of his work, their work, that tells some of the stories that you just don't see in the oil paintings of the 18th century. And then there's 12 new ones that we commissioned for this project specifically. What Jeff Ward, the writer of this film, said when he saw the first of them, he said something like, "Those are wonderful, those are remarkable. They're not trying to trick you." And I think that's important. We're not, if you see those watercolors, you know they're not from the 18th century, but we did the research and Greg Harlan did the research, and the people and the historians have done over the time period have surfaced these stories, and they were there too. And we're a visual medium. This is a way that we feel like we can represent them. But you don't always have to see people to know their stories. We can also hear them while we're looking at a sunset or whatever else we might be looking at.
Yeah, I mean, David said it all. I think, like David said, we did try to uncover depictions of marginalized people, women, and Native Americans. So, we obviously have, the portrait of Phyllis Wheatley, Alawa Equiano, I think is in there. Some, more prominent African American individuals, but like David said, very few people in general had their portraits taken. And so, through the, like David said, the material culture, list of names who escaped, their letters to Sir Guy Carleton when they're petitioning for freedom, their petition cards that they received from Carleton in order to evacuate at the end of the war from the United States. Those kinds of things we use to represent their presence. And and again, Greg Harlan and Wood Ronceville Harlan, they were just an amazing group of people. They take their time to do the research. They've worked with other museums, and our own advisors advise us on the imagery as well. So, we were really doing our best to find images that could also represent, the marginalized experience, even though those individual people that we show may not have been the specific people that were, maybe specifically referring to. So we try to, make sure there's some sort of balance so that we don't see so many of the top-down individuals' portraits. We did try to incorporate other oil paintings that could stand in for those people. So it was a mixture, and it was extremely complicated and difficult to do. But I think we did our best in doing it. So.
And not to be too much of a booster for museums, but another advantage they have over us is that it's really hard to use material culture, artifacts, furniture in our two-dimensional medium when we're also going through time. We can't stop and say somebody made this, somebody sat here, but you can do that in a museum. You can walk through a space in a way that you can't with ours. So that's all out there too, to tell the story of people who didn't have their portrait painted.
Yeah.
Well, I think everything you're saying really culminates in this incredible amount of research that you've done on lesser known yet still incredibly important individuals, and a lot that you've unearthed there. I'm wondering if there were any particular images, whether it is of the marginalized population or otherwise, that you discovered during your research journey that maybe changed how you approached a scene or a narrative.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That is a good question. I think the visual imagery, I mean, the way this project in particular, we started off with a script, at least when I joined the team. Many of the episodes had already been written. And this was the kind of story we hoped to tell. We were afraid that maybe we couldn't tell all parts of the story because there isn't the visual um, imagery to help support it. We do shoot a lot of cinematography at the different places and reenactors and but sometimes you are trying to tell a specific story about a specific person. So I think in the end, our job was to see what we can find in order to support the narrative, and very few scenes got cut. So it's a huge story. It's very complicated, but very few scenes got cut because we lacked the visual imagery to help support it, to help tell the story. And I think that was a really big accomplishment.
Hmm.
But I think, yeah, David, I don't know if you can think of any, but I think
Sure.
it's, yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead, go for
Oh,
it.
I think we would not have cut a scene just because there wasn't something to show for it, which I don't know if other people would do that, but I'm very much glad that that's our way of thinking because I'm just kind of I'm all about the history. There's a scene in our third episode, which is a long scene. It's the Battle of Long Island. It's the biggest battle of the war in terms of number of people who are involved in it, and it takes place in present day Brooklyn. So the battlefield is paved or cement or steel. They don't even know where some of the bodies are buried because they're probably under a U-Haul dealer, a U-Haul center, or something. They just don't even know. And New York just paves over itself in its own marvelous way, but covers up its history, not intentionally. So how do you tell that story? Um, we employed everything we had. We use reenactors. We use some CGI maps that show what that part of Long Island would have looked like back then. Um, we have more traditional two-dimensional maps, and then we really take apart this glorious painting by Alonzo Chapel. And it's a painting. I don't remember exactly what it's called, but maybe the Battle of Long Island. And you, because it's such high resolution, because there's so much going on in it, it can cover a lot more than other images could. I don't know what we would have done for that scene. I know we would have done something because that's such important history, but it really unlocked how we could tell that story in a meaningful way. You can see people drowning, which is part of that story. You can see people surrendering. You can see people trying their best to fight on. And ultimately, it's a horrible defeat for the Americans, which is part of the reason that it's not painted again and again and again and again. It's part of the reason the battlefield is not preserved. Um, there's just stories in themselves in the lack of art sometimes, but that's one that I can think of. There's other artworks that have really unlocked scenes for us for sure, but that's just one that comes to mind.
So I guess to kind of shift a little bit and zoom out again, as it were, I'm just wondering for international viewers, many will know the US as a symbol of modern democracy, but one also built on some complex and challenging realities.
Hmm.
What insights does the series offer into the legacy of the revolution that non-Americans might use to interpret the US today?
Yeah.
I don't know what it necessarily says about the US today. Um, but maybe there's just something in, I mean, that's a really tough one because I think we are a product of that history as we are the product of all the 250 years that have come since. So not it's not as though it would be wasted time if you're trying to understand who we are today, but it's not going to tell you everything, of course. One thing that surprised me in understanding this story is how many how varied the population of Eastern North America was at the time of the Revolution. I don't know if that's just how it's been passed down or that a lot of the artwork is people who look a lot alike. But this is a place with people from all over the world. Well, at least particularly Africa, Europe, and North America, and people speaking all sorts of different languages. Um, it's a coalition that fought the war of different ages, certainly of different religions. Um, I think that is America. I think that is what the United States has always been. Um, I don't think the United States is alone in that, but it's pretty unique to the New World, I think. At least, well, that's probably not even true. But it at the time, I think that the East Coast of North America was there's nothing in the world that Christopher Brown says in our film that had as wide variety of people living in it. Um, and I think that's America more than anything.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for taking on that challenging question.
You saw
Uh,
me like learning the answer in my head as it went along.
Yeah, I was like, oh, I'll leave that to David. I'm just the image person. Yeah, the larger issues. I mean, I guess I would just add, some of the same fights we're having today, you can, see them back then, the checks and balances of our government, petitioning our government for, different resources or laws, how we interact as citizens among each other. I think you can clearly see, rooted in, this time in the American Revolution. So if you're trying to perhaps understand our politics a little bit, you can look towards, Samuel Adams and, his writing, you know, different screeds against, Parliament and what have you. That's Twitter today or, Threads or whoever you follow. I think, not to generalize, but, I think, how we interact as citizens, I think you can see it, is rooted in our history.
John Adams said was he was talking to a French historian near the end of the war. The French historian wanted to make a history of the American Revolution, and Adams told him it would take the whole of the longest life to compile stuff from all over the world because this is the history of the whole world during that epocha. Um, it's not the history of the whole world, but a lot of the world is involved. It's Spain, it's the Netherlands, it's France, it's England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales. Um, all of the Caribbean was affected. Certainly the east coast of North America, but also the Gulf Coast, the interior. It's the history, and it's a foundational moment for Canada, for Sierra Leone. Um, I think I think that this story will tell you a lot about humanity, almost more than it will tell you about the United States. It will tell you about both, but I think this is a human story. I think things that happen to humans in horrible, unpredictable, um, scary times happen to people at this time. How often do we think about war refugees with regard to the American Revolution? You might in Canada, but we do not in the United States very much. And there are all sorts of war refugees from all sides in this story. Um, so I think you get a better understanding of humanity from understanding this, and that's why I think it matters around the globe.
that's a very lovely answer. Thank you for that. Um, as we're starting to wrap up, I think, David, you've already basically summed up your sell there on the entire series. But if you wanted audiences to really only remember one thing from the American Revolution documentary series that you've wonderfully put together, what would you like that to be?
Slim, do you have an answer?
What the one thing,
It's a tough question.
oh, that is a tough question. Of course you throw it to me. Um,
I'll answer if you don't have one, but I want to know your answer
you want to know my answer.
if you have one.
Um, I think it's just, what an amazing time this was. What a amazing story this was. The depth of the history that we go into, and the steps in which this country took to become where it became, where it is now. Um, that kind of story is what I feel like people should take away. Just um, the twists and turns. So that's one thing. And, for, specifically Americans, like this is your history. Again, I say it again, this is something that you should claim, that you should know, that you should dive deep in and learn more about. I really hope folks will, take this opportunity to learn about the country that they live in. And, one thing that as citizens, in order to make informed decisions about how we want this country to be, I think it's important to know where we came from.
Hmm.
And I think just also visually, it's such a beautiful. We hope that people really feast on the visual imagery and the live cinematography that we do, the paintings, the photographs. That the world is, back then we can make it so vibrant. That it was a vibrant world. It was a
Hmm.
interesting world filled with, like David said, all kinds of people in this country. And I hope folks will see themselves in some of the stories that we tell. That there's a place for everyone in this story. I really truly believe that, and then we tried hard to make that happen.
So just a point on how pretty it is. It's available on pbs.org and the PBS app if you're in the States, and I think in Canada, in 4K UHD, and that's the first PBS property where that's the case. And then what I want people to come away from this, and it's not just Americans, but anybody, this is an incredibly uncertain time that they lived through. But in that uncertainty, they found possibility. And not just the people that won the war, people who lost their freedom in that war, lost their land in that war, um, people who fought for those things, they were fighting for different possibilities for themselves and their posterity. This founding generation was, I wouldn't say exceptional. I think maybe they lived through exceptional times, um, but they thought generationally in a way that I don't think we quite do. They looked back to previous generations, to antiquity. They knew their history, and they drew on that when they were making their case and when they were making their founding documents. They also talked a lot about unborn millions, and that means us. And I think that anybody who takes the time to watch these 12 hours, okay, you're committed a bit to a generation that came before, but consider that you're just part of the stream of human history. We're not, knock on wood, in end times. We have to do the work in our own time to achieve those possibilities that we can see in incredibly uncertain times, if that's where we are now.
Wow. Well, I really want to thank you both for such beautiful responses. It's really been such a pleasure. And speaking on behalf of the team, we really, really love working with Florentine Films and both yourself, David, and yourself, Salimah. Um, do we have time for one or two questions from the audience? Maybe we can take one. If I can grab that. Okay. So Lee from Onarga writes, sometimes the most dramatic moments in history don't have a picture. How do you create a powerful scene for a historical event that no one ever painted?
Um, yeah, we don't like to really recreate. So we use reenactments, but we're filming people doing what people did and then using it with like just seeing people's legs or moving or their hands at work or whatever it is, seeing them from behind, seeing them in silhouette. You're not thinking, what does this person do for their day job? Um, but it's not like let's go film the Battle of Monmouth. We filmed all this stuff. Maybe we can use some of it in the Battle of Monmouth. So if you want to hear something really important, um, I think, we employ all sorts of different things, but if it's something really, really important that you want people to hear, you don't want to distract them with the visual. So you want to show them something really pretty, maybe something that evokes what they're talking about, maybe not, but something that stops them in their tracks and lets them drink in what they're hearing. Um, so it's less about recreating that moment than it is just giving the audience your trust that they can take this in if you give them, if you don't overwhelm them with too much other stuff to pay attention to.
And then I would say, along with that, in this particular project, I think I mentioned, we mentioned we employed illustrators. So, Washington inoculated his army. There are no paintings of that, so we asked our illustrators to do the research. We did the research as well as to how to um, talk about such an extremely important thing that Washington did in order to make sure he preserves his army. And so we did do that. And also we don't need a painting. We sometimes look for documents. Many of our main characters don't have portraits made, but they signed their pension request forms that are in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. So you see their writing there. Some actually wrote journals, so you'll see their handwriting there. And again, it's not see dog, hear dog, as we like to say in our industry, but it's it gets over, it gets to the point.
Perfect. Well, I think we're just about at the end of our time here. As much as I would love to chat with you all day, I really want to thank you again
Thank
and
you.
Thank you very much.
congratulations on a very beautiful documentary and a huge endeavor. Um,
Thanks.
for anyone that sent in questions, we will try and get back to you via email. But thank you again, Salimah and David, and I hope we can sit down again soon with the next project.
That'll be fun.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the
Thank you.
opportunity,
And thank you to all of those
guys.
who tuned in. See you
Yes,
soon.
thank you all. Take care. Bye.